The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily represent those of any organization, including One Generation Away.
America is free. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of enterprise, and freedom is special and rare.
This is Liberty Nation with Mark Angelides, a production of LibertyNation.com, going after what the politicians really mean and making it all clear for your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Mark Angelides.
Political machinations are plenty as Joe Biden seeks to bolster his failing international reputation with domestic success. But to what cost? Shenanigans in Fairfax County as Virginians go to the polls. How is it that every event, no matter how subtle and seemingly unimportant, is descending into absolute chaos? Welcome to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio American Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. And on today's show, we'll be looking at the Biden spending spree, the Virginia gubernatorial race, the idea of taxing unrealized income, and talking liberty to discuss the big cases of the week. I'd like to take a moment to wish a fond hello to our listeners out in Kankakee, Illinois on WKAN on 1320 AM and 103.3 FM. Thanks for being part of the team. Remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. Let's dive right in. Putting aside the day-to-day machinations that seem so requisite for passing unpopular legislation, how does a party with a razor-thin majority navigate the turbulent waters of the Washington, D.C. swamp? Well, to help us answer that question, we're fortunate to be joined by longtime host of Liberty Nation Radio and senior political analyst for LibertyNation.com, Mr. Tim Donner. Thanks for being here, Tim.
Always a pleasure, Mark.
So, Tim, we've seen the last few months, they've exposed fault line after fault line in the Democratic Party as they try to pass legislation. There's been talk of changing party affiliations, discussions about Biden's overall weakness at controlling his own party. And here we are, less than 1 year into his presidency. Is this the type of drama we can expect for the next 3 years, or will it get worse?
Well, we're at a point where I think we could say, come on, it can't possibly get any worse than this.
Never say never.
Yeah, I mean, that is an indication of how bad it is, not an indication of whether there's any more downside. And for the Democrats, look, they're going to pass something. They originally wanted $6 trillion. People forget that because we focused on the $3.5 trillion. But they originally wanted $6 trillion. We're willing to go for 3.5. Now, how willing are they to go for 1.5, 1.75 in terms of whether that is considered a victory and something that can raise their numbers rather than lower them? Look, this is all they're going to get before the midterms. So they've got to get while the getting's good, because they're probably going to lose at least the House or the Senate or both in 2022.
Yeah, I feel that this year has sort of given everybody a crash course in DC machination and maneuvering. It kind of seems that everybody's now talking about reconciliation and Senate parliamentarians as if these were topics that were in the mainstream all along.
Yeah.
But that's not really the case, is it? It's only with Kamala Harris having the swing vote and the smallest possible majority. I think they can afford to lose 3 seats in any House vote. These elements really come into play. Now, could you give us a basic rundown of what these processes and machinations are and why they're so important right now?
Well, effectively, you need unanimous support if you're the Democrats in both the House and the Senate, because the Progressive Caucus is going to vote as one, and they're the ones that are holding out because they're not getting the full range of new social benefits that were in the original plan. So the filibuster, we've heard a lot about it. It's been in place in the Senate since the mid to late 1800s. It's the only thing left, essentially, Mark, that provides the minority party any rights at all in a balkanized political climate where, frankly, there's no discussion between the two parties. That filibuster is something that's been threatened. It does not look like they have the votes to get rid of it. They probably, again, have 48. but they probably don't have Manchin, and they probably don't have Sinema. Reconciliation, which is basically a process that allows the party in charge to pass any kind of new bill with only a simple majority instead of the usual 60 because of the filibuster. So basically what they do is they jam in everything that can possibly be considered tied to the budget and that the parliamentarian will deem worthy of the reconciliation process. Only on budget matters. That's a sticky wicket. And so the parliamentarian, this unelected woman named Elizabeth McDonough, has incredible power because she gets to interpret the standing rules of the United States Senate and parliamentary procedure.
President Biden, he's been pushing for his landmark legacy spending for quite some time, but I mean, he wanted something sweeping in hand before he met with the other world leaders in Glasgow for this climate conference 26. He wanted to show them what a great leader and uniter he was after his performance with the Afghan withdrawal. So surely this kind of attitude, although appealing to the out-and-out globalists who don't think America should really be doing anything by itself, doesn't it leave the regular Americans feeling a little cold? Is it just a vanity project for Joe Biden?
Well, for Joe Biden to think that because he comes up with some legislative language that's going to fix climate change to the satisfaction of the climate change extremists in the global community is a joke, because they don't trust him after Afghanistan. They don't believe that he's competent. They don't believe that he's all there. They don't believe he's in charge. They believe he made really a fatal decision in Afghanistan, and it shocked all these people in the international community who thought he was one of them, that he could be trusted, unlike Trump, who actually, if you look at it and you take the personality away, the competence of his decisions was so much higher than Joe Biden. But we've talked about the cost of this legislation. This is a reconciliation bill. We talked about the timing. We talked endlessly about the various contents, but we haven't talked about who really pays for it, Mark, because
I can guess.
in an article this week entitled Zero Cost Socialism, basically what they're trying to say is, hey, we'll give you everything on our wish list, every goodie to make you vote for us for life. And it's really going to cost nothing, because the only people that get targeted are those nasty, ugly billionaires and their ill-gotten gains. So the fact that they're targeted means it's effectively zero cost. But they say only the rich will pay higher taxes, which is a fallacy, because there's $100 million going forward in new tobacco taxes, for example. Those tax the poorest of people, because the poorest people are the ones who smoke the most cigarettes, right? There's also this odious proposed provision of the bill which would allow them to collect taxes on capital gains that haven't even been realized. In other words, they get their cut before you even get yours. You don't even get the capital gain before they come in and confiscate a high percentage of it. So, all of this is going to come home to roost on them when the reality of this bill, all-you-can-eat buffet of a reconciliation bill, is finally passed. Fortunately, thanks to Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, it'll be less noxious than it might have been.
Tim Donner, thank you ever so much. Now, don't go anywhere. Later in the show, we'll be talking about how college applicants are ditching whiteness. But before that, after this short break, we'll be back with Leesa K to figure out what's happening in Virginia's gubernatorial clash of the titans.
For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Mark Angelides.
If it feels like the future of America hangs on the results of the Virginia gubernatorial race between Democrat Terry McAuliffe and Republican Glenn Youngkin, well, that's at least half right. After McAuliffe drafted in every big name to stump for him, this election now appears to have become an intimate referendum on the state of the Biden administration. Polls show a dead even split or thereabouts, but if Politico has made a huge mistake in attaching their legacy to a single contest. Well, to figure this out, we're joined by Liberty Nation editor-in-chief Leesa K, who just so happens to not only be a fount of knowledge on all things political, but also a resident of the Virginia Commonwealth. Welcome back to the show, Leesa.
Good to be here, Mark.
So it's great to have you on. I've got to ask the first thing. What's happening in Fairfax County, Virginia?
Well, there's a little bit of controversy going on in Fairfax County. In fact, we were the first to be on the story. And by way of disclosure, the organization who has filed suit against the Fairfax County Board of Elections is the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, whose president sits on the board of directors of our parent organization. But what VIPP found, and they have filed suit through the Public Interest Legal Foundation, PILF, and they're the ones that have filed suit. But basically, let me tell you what they found. They found that Virginia's Fairfax County elections, and I'm taking this from Scott Cosenza's article, which was exclusive to us, this interview. They voted officials are violating state law in issuing absentee ballots. Election officials are accused of dispensing ballots in blatant violation of identification requirements. So basically what they're doing, Mark, is if you request a ballot online or not in person, you're supposed to give the last 4 digits of your social. Well, they're not requiring that. Now, over in Loudoun County, where all the big school issues are going on, they require it. The whole state has to require it. It's state law. It's in the Virginia Constitution.
Yeah, so Liberty Nation's been keeping a very, very close eye on this. You can check out the copy there on site. Now, tell me, why has Joe Biden hitched his wagon so securely to the Virginia gubernatorial? Is this a question of distracting the masses from the other notable failures and issues of his administration?
Well, he's clearly trying to make this a referendum on Trump again. Just the other day, he mentioned Trump's name in a speech for McAuliffe 24 times, right? And I think the reason they're trying to make Glenn Youngkin, the Republican running for governor, out to be a Trumpist is because that's the only way they can kind of get their base going again. They need to get out the vote, and it's very tight, Mark. It's a very tight race.
Yeah, if they make this a referendum on Trump, then they have all to gain by going into the 2022 midterms. They can say, as you can see, not only was Trump rejected in the 2020 election, he's been rejected again in this, the first test of the electorate after the election. So what are the numbers telling us at the moment, Leesa? Well,
the Real Clear Politics average, and I looked at it this morning, and I have it right here. The spread is 0.8 for McAuliffe, and all the polls have McAuliffe up by 1 or more, except for the University of Mary Washington poll. I don't know much about that. But the one poll that I do know a lot about is the Trafalgar group, and that's a pretty good poll. Trafalgar has a 95% confidence in their polls, and they tend to be right. And they have the race between Youngkin and McAuliffe as a dead tie. So that shows you how close it is.
Yeah, I think in reality, anything below a 3-point win for McAuliffe will be considered a loss across the country and pretty much a rejection of the Biden administration, I think. Now, we've seen in Virginia specifically, we've seen education and specifically school boards in the region making national news on a daily basis. Do you think this is what's going to motivate voters, or is it the increasingly damaged economy and the inflation that will send folks to the polls?
Well, if you look at the demographics, the people that gave Hillary Clinton won Virginia by 5 points and Biden won it by 10. And the people that really crossed over were those suburban women, the women in Fairfax County and in Loudoun County. And of course, Loudoun County has made national news with their uproarious school board meetings and resignations and parent upset. And it's just a holy mess over there. So the county just to my west, Loudoun County and Fairfax County are the mother lodes. Those are the big counties in Virginia. And school issues are really hot here. And if those suburban women change their tune, that's good news for Glenn Youngkin.
So give us the inside skinny. What's happening on the ground in Old Dominion? Are you seeing lawn signs? Lawn signs, they're a great indicator.
Yeah, lawn signs really are a great indicator, surprisingly. There are a lot of McAuliffe signs and there are a lot of Youngkin signs. And I've actually driven through Loudoun and Fairfax and tried to get a gauge, and it's 50-50, you know? A lot of people, I've talked to a lot of Republicans here in Fairfax County. They all think Youngkin's going to pull it out. My husband thinks Youngkin's going to pull it out. Personally, I hate to be Debbie Downer here, but I think McAuliffe might pull it out.
It's certainly possible. He has had every Democrat who's not in prison or out of favor come to stump for him. That's quite the troop, although not as it would be.
Not to interrupt, but if you don't require people to have the last 4 digits of their Social Security number, you know as well as I do, the people without Social Security numbers are
not legal to vote in the United States of America.
Exactly. But if they can get their hands on a ballot and vote, you know, I think that's why this whole case by Virginia Institute for Public Policy is so interesting.
So all this talk of schools and curricula and of parental input into what the children are being taught, it seems to me that whatever is the final result of the election, whether McAuliffe inches it or Youngkin makes a surprise win, the genie is already out of the bottle. The idea that concerned parents shouldn't have a say in the content and material being taught to their offspring is this toothpaste that, regardless of the results, this is toothpaste that just can't be put back in the tube, right?
Right. Well, here in America, we call it toothpaste. But anyway, Mark.
What do I call it?
Toothpaste, which I thought was kind of funny. But anyway, make no mistake about it. If Glenn Youngkin pulls this race out, that's going to be a big upset. And I think that's why the Democrats are pulling out Obama and Jill and Joe and, you know, everybody out of the kitchen sink at the last minute. Though I'm not really sure what good Biden will do for them, considering his numbers in the polls have been sinking so rapidly. But, you know, if Youngkin does topple the expected Virginia blue, which has come to happen, you know, more and more recently. I've lived here for 30 years. It was a red state when I first moved here. Actually, 35 years ago, it was a red state. And then it turned purple, and now it's been blue for a while. So if Virginia does go red with its governor, and again, keep in mind, the Commonwealth only permits one term for governor or a non-consecutive term, which is why McAuliffe gets to run again. But if he does, you know, that's going to be a big deal on the national level.
Well, a rising tide lifts all ships, but a sinking president can drag anybody else down with him he wants. Leesa K. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you, Mark.
Coming up on the show, we're looking at a new law that coerces you to get involved if you witness a crime. But next up, Andrew Moran's joining us to see just how far the administration is willing to go to get your hard-earned dollars from your pocket into theirs. Don't touch that dial. You're listening to Liberty Nation Radio, heard across the Radio America network from our flagship station in the nation's capital, WWRC, in Washington, D.C. I just want to say thanks to you for listening and give a special shout out to those of you on KBKW 103.5 FM, the talk of Grays Harbor, Washington.
America is free. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of enterprise, and freedom is special and rare.
This is Liberty Nation with Mark Angelides, a production of LibertyNation.com, going after what the politicians really mean and making it all clear for your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Mark Angelides.
With news that a brand new tax on unrealized capital gains is coming into play, we have to ask the all-important question, is this a tax on hope? Will it just impact the super wealthy? Or is it going to be, like income tax before it, something that eventually hits us all? Well, to delve deep into this can of worms, we're joined by economist and author, Mr. Andrew Moran. Welcome aboard, Andrew.
Thank you for having me.
So tell me, this unrealized capital gains, am I right in thinking that this is money that you've not yet earned?
Yeah, so let's say I buy shares in Tesla or Apple, let's say I did 5 years ago, and I accumulated all this capital from it, but I never hit the sell button. But it's still not money I've yet to earn. So it's exactly what it says, unrealized. Once I hit the sell button, then I get all that profit. Then that money actually goes into my account. It's actually liquid. It's money I can utilize. Unrealized gains, and then of course unrealized losses, as if the stock is going down, it's in the red. But I've yet to hit the sell button. So so realized, unrealized. Unrealized is money you haven't yet made. Realized is money that you have made.
All right. So how does this work in practice? What happens if you have a stock that you buy for, let's say, $10 and it shoots up to $100? You're then liable for tax on that $90 profit, right? Under this scheme. But then what happens if it drops down to $1? If you've already paid the tax on that, is the government going to hunt you down and give you a refund?
I highly doubt that. Although there has been some discussion about using it as a tax deduction on the end of the year. But yeah, it's exactly as you say. So if I buy, let's say, Suncorp at $25 on January 1st, and it shoots up to $60 on December 31st, then I have to pay $35 a share in taxes. But then the other kicker is that fine, you have this unrealized gains tax, but then when you sell that tax, you hopefully make a profit, you pay tax on that as well. It's completely absurd. It's your double tax on your stock holdings. It's completely unfair. And I know it's supposed to only go after the billionaires, but it's eventually going to seep into other classes as well.
Yeah, so let's talk about impact. I mean, who's this going to affect? At the moment, it's being billed that this is a tax on the super wealthy. That's the billing, right? That's the sales pitch. Now, as you and I both know, and everybody really knows, income tax, which was initially meant to be a temporary measure, initially only affected very few people, very, very few. But now, over a period of time, and it's not that long a time, is it? What is it, 107 years since income tax was first brought in the United States? Now it's just about
Nancy Pelosi's age, I think, right?
Yeah. So now that's just about everybody pays some form of income tax. Is the same thing going to happen here?
Yeah, you're exactly right. It was more than a century ago. They had that income tax. It was you had two tax rates, 1% and 6%. It was only supposed to impact 3%. Fast forward to the present, everyone, if you're in any sort of income, you get tax on it. So yeah. So when it comes to this unrealized gains, the first target is the super wealthy, the billionaires. But my prognostication is that it's not going to generate nearly as much revenue as the federal government hoped. And the billionaires are going to use the loopholes, which they should, and they're going to use their accountants, which they should, and they're going to flee elsewhere. And then the government's going to say, okay, you know what, let's lower the burden to, let's say, 50 to 100 million incomes with 50 and $100 million. And then that's not going to generate enough wealth. And they're going to keep lowering and lowering and lowering it until the Robin Hooders, the men in digital tights, they're going to be taxed to the oblivion too. And then you also have the other issue too, is that, is this going to impact crypto holders as well? Is it going to impact cryptocurrency investors? Is that going to pop a bubble? Is that going to lead to a sell-off? So there's so many uncertainties, and most of them are negative. But also, I'll add one more thing here, is that there's a great quote from legendary economist Milton Friedman, and he said, "There's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program," and this is exactly it.
That is one of the classic sayings. So it's not just about stocks, though, right? So people who are listening who think, well, my stock portfolio, that's kind of protected by my 401k or whatever. It's not just about stocks. It's about property, right? It's essentially everything that can be realized as a capital. So if it's something that you could sell in future and gain a profit on, it would cover that. So that's houses, art, even businesses to some extent, right?
Yeah, so if I buy my Van Gogh painting for $100 million, and it goes up in value, then yeah, that's going to be taxed. But the issue with that is that it's fine. It's easy to assess the value of a stock. You just go in your brokerage account and say, okay, fine, the stock is up 25%. But if I'm using, let's say, artwork, I'm using a Munch or a Modigliani, you have to utilize a wide variety of assessments to determine its actual value. So the government's just going to come up with its own imaginary figure, its own definition, and then say, okay, fine, this Van Gogh, you got to pay, $30 million on it. And then once you sell it, you're going to give us another $25 million on it. So it's all subjective. The government's going to max out as best as they can on that deal.
Let's delve into that just a little bit more, Andrew. So let's say, for example, somebody has their wealth tied up in various assets. So maybe they're cash poor. Let's say, for example, they've got, let's say you get left a Van Gogh, lucky you. Now, you've got that painting. Now, that painting appreciates in price over time, but you're just a regular wage earner, but you happen to have an asset here. Now, does this mean that you could be liable for, let's say, for example, $30 million in taxes when maybe you earn $150,000 a year? And so therefore, you're going to be obliged to sell that piece of art at possibly a very bad time in the market, just to pay the taxes on something that you haven't earned any income on anyway.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. This is the problem with this proposal is it's not delving into any specifics as of yet. But what I assume what would happen is that when it comes to, let's say, the artwork or the unrealized tax gains, they'll probably look at your income tax return at the end of the year and say, fine, if you're over, if you're making $1 billion a year, then you're the one going to be taxed. Or if your annual income is at $30,000 a year, then you're not going to pay, you're not going to pay much tax on this Van Gogh, as the Dutch would like to say. So I think as time goes by, the Biden administration is going to release more details, but for now, it's best to count hold on to your nuts like a squirrel in the wintertime.
Well, you'll probably be taxed on those nuts as well. So what I really want to ask about here, final question pretty much, is how will this impact investment? So obviously anything that impacts potential earnings in the future scares investors. They have it, their investment funds. They want to realize a return on it. But that's the advantage of only paying capital gains once you make the capital gain, which obviously gives it its name. But if you're going to be paying it on speculative numbers, because you don't know for sure when you can price out of a market, is this going to scare investors away from American markets, not just in stocks, but in entrepreneurial schemes, businesses, things like this?
Yes, this is one of the downfalls of this legislation. I don't know if you've ever seen The Wolf of Wall Street and that scene between Matthew McConaughey and Leonardo DiCaprio. And Matthew McConaughey says the financial market doesn't exist. It's imaginary. It's fairy dust. So I think that's exactly how the Biden administration views the financial markets. It's not really real. But this is complete poppycock because the financial markets are critical to economic growth. So if you have this unrealized gains tax on U.S. investors, they're just going to take their capital and go to China. They'll go to Europe. They'll go to Australia. They'll go to New Zealand. They're going to take all their capital. You're going to have a huge exodus. You're going to have massive capital outflows, and that's going to benefit other foreign markets. So it seems like Biden wants to make the world great again, as opposed to making America great again, because all this capital is going to flee. Another important point is that when you own a share, you're owning a share of the company. The company sells those shares to generate enough money to, let's say, expand their company, hire more workers. They want to develop a product. When you're taking that money out of the financial markets and giving it to Joe Biden's pockets, that's going to hurt the long-term growth of all these businesses. Now, Tesla, they'd be fine. Apple, they'd be okay. It's these medium cap stocks that debut at that other IPO that are going to be hammered on these. They're not going to generate enough money because if let's say 30% of investors take their capital and go to India, that's 30% less for American companies. So this kind of long-term consequences. I hope, that the administration or the U.S. government's going to say, okay, this is a bad idea. It just shows how their desperation of how they need to come up with any imaginary scheme to take money that you haven't even earned yet to cover this massive $2, $3, $5 trillion spending programs by the Democrats and President Biden.
As Sonny Corleone once said, perhaps it's time to hit the mattresses. Andrew Moran, thank you ever so much.
Thank you, sir.
Right after this short break, we'll be talking liberty with Scott D. Cosenza, asking why so many college applicants see it as detrimental to be white and how the government has encouraged perverse incentives to lie. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network.
For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Mark Angelides.
And we are with our special Talking Liberty segment, joined by Mr. Scott D. Cosenza to discuss all things legal, liberty, and lunacy. Welcome back, Scott.
Hi, Mark. Thank you.
So, Scott, let's dive straight into this. Pennsylvania lawmakers are introducing a duty to assist bystander bill. Now, this came on the heels of something tragic and horrifying. I guess most of our listeners might be familiar with it was the finale to Seinfeld. Could you give us a little more information on this one, please?
Well, I think you'll fill in the Seinfeld details. I'll fill in the recent news events, which were that a woman was sexually assaulted over the course of a commuter train ride in Philadelphia. It is a horrific story, one of the most horrific criminal justice stories, I think, in recent memory. And the officials, upon the initial kind of press releases that they came out with, both the police chief for the SEPTA, which is the Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority, the train authority, and also the police chief for the town where the train terminal was, where they actually made the arrest, blamed the bystanders for not doing more to come to the woman's aid by calling police. And they alleged that these people recorded the assault and did nothing basically to help. Mark said to say, just to pour vinegar on the wound of this attack itself was that the authorities, the ones that are charged with keeping us safe, then of course they blamed other innocents. And it turns out that it wasn't even true. It was a lie. They libeled the public in order to take the blame off of themselves. And this is a furtherance, an outgrowth from that lie. It's State Senator Jim Brewster's bill. And they call it a duty to assist bill, but that's really been mislabeled because what it is it's a duty to report bill. And what it says is that under certain conditions, including what would have taken place on this train or what did take place on this train, a person has a duty to report that, an affirmative duty in the law. And if they don't report it, then they themselves are guilty of a criminal act. And it's a shocking display of power when you can have a not a guilty mind and not a guilty act, but yet still be willing to throw your neighbor in a cage because you didn't like their response to being the close witness to a violent sexual assault. I think it's really beyond the pale, as you can imagine from my diatribe there, Mark.
Yeah, I think the issue here is most people listening would assume that, well, of course, if you saw something like that happening, you would either intercede or report anyway. But I guess the rub of this is that there are certain things that are considered crimes that most people don't want to really be involved with. For example, if they see an argument between a couple, couples have arguments, and now they under this bill would be legally obliged to report this, or they could face criminal charges, even if it were just an argument between Mark, a man and a wife.
You can imagine, well, what if you didn't know if it was a couple? What if you didn't know if it was a parent disciplining a child and not something worse? You out of an abundance of caution, you'd have to be on the phone of the authorities with regularity to keep yourself in good standing that you weren't then liable for a crime. And, the other thing is we know how horrible the criminal justice system is to the people who are the convicts. I'm talking about what happens behind prison walls, Mark, and to suggest that we should take an innocent person who literally did nothing wrong except not respond in the preferred way to being this witness and then subject them to the treatment of deprivation of liberty and being in a cage. It takes my breath away. It absolutely takes my breath away that people should think that that's an acceptable response for, again, the SEPTA police could maintain law and order on their trains. It's not like there's 1,000 trains a day and there's 10 officers. Those people with their generous salaries and defined benefit pensions are sitting back in their offices and not on the trains protecting people. And then when somebody is assaulted in the worst possible way, they take it and blame the few folks who have such fewer resources that they have to subject themselves to being on that train. It's just a pitiful endeavor all in.
Yeah, for lawmakers to be introducing bills on something that was, as it turns out, a falsehood anyway, it really shows that there appears to be a war against normal people, and the judiciary is the weapon being wielded. Now,
I haven't heard that before, and I like it very much. A war against normal people.
Well, you're welcome to use it anytime you like. It's a Mark Angelides original. Now, moving on to this, there's another story I want to talk about, Scott. So a poll came out recently, Scott, that showed a little over a third of white applicants surveyed admitted to faking a racial component to their makeup in order to benefit from either a college admission or benefits accrued with that college admission for being basically not being 100% white. Could you give us a couple of details on that, please?
Yes, white is the disfavored race in college applications, and everybody knows it. And so it's actually such a benefit that's where people are willing to falsify their application by lying about it. A full third, Mark, of these surveyed. Intelligent.com is the name of the site that commissioned the survey. It seems like these are good numbers, and it suggests that just this is so widespread. It's hard to get. I mean, is there more than a third of participation in just about anything? I mean, you think about how many, what percentage of the applicant pool that is who recognize that it's not a fair deal, that they're being discriminated against on the basis of their race, which is illegal in every regard except for against whites. That's the only race-based discrimination that's permissible legally in the United States.
Let's delve into this a little bit, Scott, on the legal side. Was what the students admitted to, although I presume they admitted to it through anonymity,
right?
Is it illegal?
It is probably illegal to sign a form at the bottom of which you say, I attest that all the foregoing answers is true and complete to the best of my knowledge and ability, which I'm guessing a lot of these applications say. And then if they say race or ethnicity and you make it up, then that's a bad application, right? You've committed fraud because you've signed your name to attest to the honesty of this thing. Now, maybe they're automated, maybe they're not signed anymore. I don't know. Who knows with the way colleges work today, but you could see how easy it would be to actually make it something that. But here's the thing, Mark, it's easily falsifiable. So before we get to that point, though, I just want to say this. The thing that you have to remember, too, is how much power it has. That's why the people are motivated to lie. It's like better than a full grade point average. I said in the written piece I submitted to libertynation.com about this. Can you imagine? And so I don't even know if you know this, but SAT scores are it's the standardized test for college applicants in the United States, Mark. Just about all kids take it. And can you imagine if it was self-reported, right? Like the SAT board sends your SAT scores to the colleges that you apply to.
I got a 4.5.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Sure. I get perfect SATs. Oh, really? Well, no, not really. But if you're asking me, I'll just say that. So anyway, that's the way it is with these racial classifications. It's not like somebody's at the door saying, well, gee, you don't look like, you're an African American. You look like a Caucasian. They just say, okay.
So we've got to have a system that's creating incentives that make it beneficial to lie on college applications, because it's one of these things that, short of DNA testing people a la Elizabeth Warren, there's no real way to test it. So you're creating
not only that, you've got
a
these
series of incentives for dishonesty.
It sounds like a Hitler convention on racial classification when you really want to get into the bones of this thing and draw the lines. And that's where these things have to go, to the eugenicists' paradise of let's slice and dice everybody by their immutable character.
Alternatively, colleges and universities could grant entrance based on merit.
Mark, don't be absurd, please. Come on. Okay.
Not in this day and age.
Yeah.
Scott D. Cosenza, welcome to the non-meritorious world. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Mark.
And that's about it for this episode of Liberty Nation Radio. I want to thank our guests, Tim Donner, Andrew Moran, Leesa K. Donner, and Scott Cosenza. But most of all, you, the faithful listener. Thanks for being part of Team Liberty. One more thought before we conclude. Author Jared Kintz wrote, quote, "At first sign of crisis, the ignorant don't panic because they don't know what's going on. And then later, they panic precisely because they don't know what's going on," end quote. You and I, we all see these Biden-inspired crises coming down the road, but not the government. They didn't know how to react, and eventually they failed to act at all. Crisis after wave upon wave of crisis. Don't look to the administration to save you. They can't. They either don't know how or they don't want to. It's liberty and individualism that will weather this particular storm. Until next time, thanks for listening.